Agile, yeah! Okay, welcome back to the Agile Product Owner, the channel that I just launched about 5 hours ago. I'm very excited because in that 5 hours, people have actually viewed my initial video, my kind of introduction to the channel, and actually started asking questions. And I'm so excited that I wanted to get right into answering those questions. So in this brief time that I have before my wife or children come looking for me, I am going to attempt to answer a question from a user. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce your username for fear of mangling it. But from this user, how do you prioritize two items coming from different stakeholders as both insist and share their arguments on the value that they will bring to the product? One thing I want to note, I have a little banner up here, just a reminder, this is just my opinion. Feel free to disagree. And you're going to notice a lot on the channel that my approach to product ownership is pretty organic. It's not academic in that sense. Like I don't speak as kind of analytically as some might. I'm speaking more from my personal experience and from kind of the heart. And so bear that in mind as I kind of get this channel going. But this is a great question. How do you prioritize two items coming from different stakeholders where they both insist that theirs is the most important, essentially? I've run into this a bunch of times in my career. I think every stakeholder has. And I do have some suggestions on how you can kind of navigate those waters. This is really like one of the core duties of a product owner, to be honest, is to keep this discussion off of leadership's plate, right? As the product owner, you are responsible for creating and prioritizing the product backlog. And that means that this decision, at least in the environment that I've worked in, where I was empowered to act as a true kind of product owner, this decision is entirely yours to make. I have had situations where I've had to overrule senior leadership, directors, vice chancellors, people way above my pay grade, because, again, a core part of the job and a core part of creating the position is acknowledging that we need somebody who can make these decisions, and that person is not the vice chancellor. They have much better things to do than to sit around and be kind of directly embedded into the development process and have the kind of like knowledge from the stakeholders and from the developer's perspective to be able to make these prioritization decisions. So that's the first thing. Get used to the idea, and I don't have a card for it because it's so basic. Get used to the idea that it's your responsibility. You're going to, at the end, you're going to make a decision. You're going to be decisive, and that's going to be the play that gets run. So my first card here, very simple and generic. Just be open and honest with all the stakeholders related. I've had situations where I've pulled multiple stakeholders with competing priorities into meetings to discuss their respective requests to try and drill down on, really what is the criticality of your request compared to this other one. Is there any flexibility in terms of the timing? Could we work on X and then immediately pivot to Y afterwards? And so, just being transparent is a key aspect of Scrum, and I just think it's so important. You got to get these stakeholders into a meeting and say to them, we have conflicting priorities. We have limited development resources. Everybody's resources are limited. No one can develop everything that they want to the degree that they want to. If you kind of think about like the iron triangle in terms of quality and speed and cost, nobody it can master all three sides of that triangle. And so somebody is going to have to be disappointed. The key is to be honest and open and set expectations appropriately, right? Don't hide from the fact that somebody is going to end up going to have to wait if that's the scenario that you're in with your development resources. Make that the first thing that you make clear. We have limited resources. We have X amount of bandwidth and Y amount of work. The second, and so that's not really a strategy as much as it is just like this. Again, you want to be doing this whenever you're engaging with anybody. Basically, the collaborative nature of the role requires this transparency, openness, and honesty. Another thing that I've done in the past is I've done a compare and contrast of various kind of criteria related to development requests. So I'll get 2 requests at the exact same time, and this has literally happened to me. And I will, working with the stakeholders, I will determine a set of criteria, basically. How many users are impacted? If one request only impacts 100 users and another request impacts 10,000 users, that's a useful piece of data, right, in terms of prioritization. What's the impact of the issue that you're experiencing? Is it a nice to have, or is this a burning dumpster fire that needs to be put out immediately? How complex is the request? Is this a couple of Jira tickets, half a sprint, or is this spinning up a whole new environment and requiring monitoring and hosting and like an epic that's going to take 2 months to complete? Are there external dependencies? If request A is blocked because it needs a firewall hole punched and request B is ready to work, that again, that's a very useful piece of information in terms of prioritizing. What's the deadline? Request A is due in 2 weeks. Request B is due in 2 months. And so I would collect this kind of data and just do a comparison. And it may be that you're good at that point. It's obvious that one is kind of the higher priority than the other. I hinted at this in the previous segment about comparing and contrasting, but I didn't say it explicitly, and I do not want to get called out for not mentioning it, but obviously one of the most critical factors in prioritizing against multiple requests is the value delivered by the requests. Again, feel like I hinted at this, how many users are impacted, what's the level of impact, the severity, but just so that I don't get torn to bits, all that stuff factors into the value delivered by the request, and the value is a huge part of all of your prioritization, including prioritizing against multiple requests. That's something you can do, compare and contrast the variables to determine which one is feasible or more critical with the time that you have. Another thing you could do is think about the strategic alignment of the requests. You know, do you have a roadmap? Does one of the requests kind of closely align with your existing roadmap or your kind of mission, or your vision for the product or for the team's output? If so, that might be a factor that you could use to determine, which request rises in priority. I would always look for is there any possible crossover, any way to please both people at the same time, even if it's very low level. If you can tell one person, we've made some progress on your request, while you're telling the other person your request is our priority, boy, that would be great. Just look for, while I'm fulfilling the one request, is there anything that I can reuse on the remaining request? Another thing I've done in the past, this is tricky, you don't want to be punitive about this, but stakeholder engagement is something that I have used in the past. Is one of your stakeholders constantly responding to you, engaging, coming to your ceremonies if you are inviting them to your sprint demos, for example, constantly reaching out to you in Teams, answering your questions when you have them more so than another? That could be a factor, I think it's tricky, but Scrum in particular requires stakeholder engagement. And I have actually told people before, I'm holding this meeting to provide an update to all of our stakeholders. If you don't attend, just know that there's a possibility that your work will be deprioritized because you're not engaging in the process, and the process demands stakeholder engagement, right? So that's another potential kind of filter that you can use. But ultimately, at the end of the day, like I said, you're going to be responsible for making the decision. Make the decision and then stick with it. And be, again, open and honest with the stakeholder whose work didn't rise in priority. Tell them, based off of the other requests that we have in our product backlog and the criticality of them, we have decided that we will have to focus on other efforts before we will be able to work yours. Remind them that you have limited resources. You can only work with what you have. But be decisive, make a decision, order your backlog appropriately, and move forward, Because it's not personal, it's just the nature of the job. Somebody has to make these hard decisions, and that person in a functioning Scrum environment is the product owner. So I don't know if any of that is useful. I hope it is. Let me know in the comments what you think. Love to hear it. Other than that, I will let you all go. Have a good rest of your day.